I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to throw this out there. I have a channel over on YouTube, Life as a ... which basically hosts highlights from these audio conversations that I have with these great guests. They typically run 10 to 15 minutes, and they're there to kind of present a different vantage point. You know, for people that aren't into audio, aren't into podcasts, but are still looking for career advice, ideas, help, all that great stuff, send them over to YouTube. Like I said, Life as a ... And if you do get over there, I would love that like or subscribe. I mean, it's the best way to let that algorithm know that the content is worth sharing and should be out there. So anyway, I do thank you for letting me plug this a little bit, but I think it's about time to get into today's episode. If I were to ask you about what kind of professional opportunities exist as a research psychologist, I bet most of you would assume the work would be firmly planted in the field of academia. Now, you wouldn't be wrong. Many individuals with that background do in fact inhabit that world. And I'm not so sure there'd be that many folks thinking research psychology and entrepreneurship. Well, it is that precise connection I found to be so utterly compelling in my conversation with today's guest. She has this utterly fascinating background that combines research psychology, entrepreneurship, and get this, toys. Intrigued? Well, you should be. This episode dives into the world of possibilities that can be found through the combination of specialized knowledge, experience, and recognition of opportunity. And that central theme alone makes this talk worth tuning in for. However, for those intrigued by the thought of bridging academic knowledge with commercial opportunities, you're going to love this chat. Well, perhaps we can cut to the chase here and get into things. But first up, let me more formally introduce her to you, and we can get rolling. Dr. Amanda Gummer is a research psychologist passionate about children's play. She's also the CEO of the research consultancy Fundamentally Children and Dr. Gummer's Good Play Guide, a consumer-facing review site for children's toys, apps, learning, and baby products. And she's the independent chair of the Association of Play Industries and is on the advisory board of a small number of mission-led startups. Now, Dr. Gummer has a PhD in neuropsychology, the postgraduate certificate in higher education, and over 20 years' experience working with children and families. And widely considered as the UK's go-to expert on play, parenting, and child development, her book Play was published in May 2015 and has been translated into different languages, with extracts being published in the USA's Toy Industry Association Genius of Play initiative, for which she's an expert ambassador. Now, Dr. Gummer also has an increasing international profile and was commissioned by the Toy Association to create the STEAM Toy Accreditation Framework. She is the UK chapter chair for Women in Toys, an international networking group within the toy and licensing industries. Dr. Gummer is also regularly in the media and continues to take an active role in research and presenting papers at various international conferences. Finally, she's often involved in government policy around children's issues, presenting her balanced play model at the European Parliament in September 2019. So with all of this noted, I'd love to welcome you to my conversation with Dr. Amanda Gummer. Yeah, so welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Dr. Gummer?
I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Been really looking forward to this talk. As I just mentioned before we got recording here, I did have a guest on, Dr. Sonia Tiwari, who really strongly recommended that I get in touch with you. So I was really looking forward to this conversation and getting into all of this today with you. So yeah. And speaking of which, I do have this first segment lined up, something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my listeners know, it's just a segment where I read off a definition of something related to the guest. Now, I went with research psychologist, and a bit of a surprise here, Wikipedia didn't have a very good entry for this, or I couldn't really find anything workable. So I went with the job site Indeed. Let me just read this off for you and maybe you can comment. Does it sound okay?
Sure.
Okay, so here we go. Research psychologist. Analyzing, organizing, and collecting data is at the core of the question, what do research psychologists do? Research psychologists work hard to understand how and why treatments for various psychological illnesses are effective or ineffective. They may work independently on their own studies or work on behalf of a research institute, such as a university, to help them prepare new studies for publishing. They may also collaborate with other psychology professionals, such as counselors, psychiatrists, or assistants, to gather data to evidence their claims and hypotheses. Now, I don't know how much of this exactly lines up with you and your background. And from my own research, I think there's some holes here, but all the same, I'd like to hear from you. First thoughts.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, that feels very medical, that definition and the pathologies and the treatments and the interventions and stuff. The research we do into child development and play is to help people understand children and how they develop. There doesn't have to be a condition or an illness or a pathology there for us to do that. It's helpful for the companies that we work for to understand what normal kids, if there is ever such a thing as a normal child, what do most children do, when and how and why. That's kind of where we come in.
Yeah, okay. And there's also that point in the definition here that, it refers to speaking with other professionals, whether it's counselors, psychiatrists, or assistants to gather information. Again, I'm not so certain that that's the type of people that you're interacting with and in the type of work that you do, but all the same, what other types of professionals or types of individuals would you be working with?
So we do a lot of work with teachers, and we do work with therapists, so speech therapists, language therapists, occupational therapists, those kind of people, when we're doing studies, particularly looking at children with additional needs. But generally speaking, the professionals that we work with when we're working with the children tend to be the teachers, the caregivers, the childminders, because we're not trying to cure children's problems and we're not trying to understand where they come from. Our research is done on behalf of brands. So by and large, we're looking for how particular brands engage with children, how children engage and learn from a particular toy or a game or an app or a TV program. That's kind of where we're coming at. So we do impact measurement studies where teachers or parents will track their children's progress over a particular time, but that rarely involves sort of therapy type professionals.
Yeah, to be honest, like your explanation right there fits perfectly into the whole purpose of the segment, really. I mean, like, I think as a young person, you might go onto a job site, like Indeed here in this case, or Wikipedia or elsewhere, and read up on what particular profession is all about. But when you actually speak with the professional, sometimes there are several other different ways of interpreting it and making a living and developing a professional reputation. And I think that illustrates this point perfectly. And speaking of which, I think this might be a nice time to hear a little bit more about the work that you're doing. Certainly, I mentioned it off the top when I was introducing you, but maybe you could add some flavor to that as well and fill in some of the blanks for us.
Sure. So like you say, sometimes I struggle to know what to put on those forms, when you're filling in forms and they say, what's your occupation? Because on the one hand, it's, company director because it's my business. But on the other hand, it's if I put psychologist, it feels too wide. Sometimes when I'm talking to people I meet and they say, what do you do for a living? I keep it simple. I say, I test toys. There isn't a job description called toy tester. So you never get to fill that one in. It does seem to vary. Like you say, there's not a one size fits all. But basically, there are two sides to the business. Fundamentally, Children is the research consultancy where we help people understand children and how they interact with brands. And again, just to sort of inform that commercial decision. So they're taking an evidence-based approach to their product development, but also their marketing, communications, and all of that kind of stuff. So they understand what age children are engaging with their brand, how they're engaging with it. There's a different strategy if you are looking to create an educational brand that is sort of premium and high-end and is sort of aspirational versus something that is mass market and is just something that you're hoping is going to be a playground craze. You would have a different strategy, and you need to understand how children see your brand and how they engage with it to inform all that. You also might want to understand how they engage with the play patterns and what play patterns your product or your characters facilitate for different age groups. And so that you can then go, okay, well, this is the product range we've got at the minute. What else can we develop that would meet those needs of those kids and be engaging for them and entertaining? So we do that. We do training on ages and stages of child development, inclusivity, diversity, all of that kind of stuff. So that, again, people who are working to make things for children can really understand those children and how to make the product more appealing and maybe increase the age range that it appeals to, or increase the diversity and the accessibility so that you increase your market size. All of that stuff. It's, there's good aims. It's about making stuff inclusive, but it's also commercially beneficial too. And then the other side of what we do is Good Play Guide, and goodplayguide.com is the platform for parents, carers, educators to find really great products that can help kids thrive through play, but also a lot of content on why play is important, how to get a balanced play diet, how to help children with additional needs access play opportunities, the importance of play in mental health, all of those kind of conversations that parents and educators, are struggling with, screen time battles, all of that. And that all goes on the Good Play Guide website. But we work with people who want to do the best thing for kids and want to make children's lives better through their brands and their products and making the world more playful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first impressions, it's a lot. There's a lot on your plate there, I would say. And I'm guessing that's slowly been added to it. It probably didn't all start off in that way or in that sense. It's just been added, over the years, I'm sure. But the other thing that struck me there too is like, again, returning to this definition, like if you're just reading that definition straight up, how it presented itself, it doesn't incorporate the commercial side of things, or how, one could take this knowledge or this background in research psychology and then apply it in a commercial sense, like bringing together these two worlds, the business world and then obviously the research behind it. So I think that's really interesting as well, of how you've been able to marry the two together and really create this thriving organization.
There was a real gap in the market, because I think one of the reasons I left academia after my PhD was it just felt like all this great work was being done, but it was stuck in the ivory towers and it wasn't getting applied. And then I didn't want to be a teacher, mainly because my kids were too little, and I worried that I wouldn't give them the best of me if I'd been teaching 30 other kids all day. So, but there's that education piece as well. How do we take the research and marry that with education and help kids learn? But also, how do we help parents find good toys and feel good about their parenting decisions and all of that kind of stuff? So that sort of that there's a really nice Venn diagram, which I think is exactly the need we're meeting, is helping make research more accessible for parents and educators so that they can help guide children and make good decisions and help kids thrive better.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you raised there. I've had so many different types of guests here that started off in academia that shifted over onto the commercial side of things, just for the reasons that you outlined. Some of the stresses, some of the challenges of that side, and then also too, I guess, life, moments not aligning with where they want to spend or give their time, I suppose. But it's interesting that you found this gap here and were able to go after it and create some good in this world. Obviously, like the purpose and the mission that you have is certainly noble in nature. And again, ultimately helping parents put the best possible, toys or products in front of their children. So, yeah.
Thanks. It's also really important to me that the brands that we work with, our clients, are able to benefit from doing the right thing, because I think it's very easy to just kind of make it cheap and pile it high and sell it quickly. And that's not good for the kids. It's not good for the environment. It's not a sustainable business. So what we want to do is to really help the good guys in the industry who are doing their best by kids to be the ones to thrive. And commissioning academic research through universities is really time consuming, really expensive, and you will get a load of data. What you won't get is that competitor research in the market shows that for this kind of product, you need to hit a price point of $19.99. So what you need to, there's the sort of the practicalities or commercial realities that the purely academic research doesn't really give you. It will give you all the stuff into kids' development and how they engage with the products and the brands and all that sort of stuff. But what it doesn't give you is that interpretation of, okay, well, what can we do to our brand or our products to help be commercially successful? And I think that bit is something that our clients tell us that they really value, is because you've got the sort of the two sides of the equation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, was that something that early on you identified when you realized, okay, this is the path I want to go down when I want to leave academia? Or is that an idea that sort of evolved over time?
It came about with my first focus group, because I was doing so my dad used to sell toys, and one of the companies he was working for wanted some research doing, and it was about whether a Japanese games console would do well in the UK. So I did a focus group, that was fine. And because when I gave them the report, I didn't just say 8 out of 10 kids said this, I was like, 8 out of 10 kids said this, but that may be because at this age and stage of development, this is what's going on with them. Therefore, if you make these changes to your marketing, you might be more successful. And they were blown away by the sort of stages 2 and 3 because they'd only just ever had the raw data before. And they were like, oh, we've never done this. Could you do some more? And then could you do some more? And then they recommended me out, and it grew from there. So it was something that I did instinctively, and I didn't know that nobody else was doing it.
Isn't it funny how things work out in that sense, once in a while? And then, if you can catch yourself in the moment and then realize like what's being communicated across to you and what that could represent to future clients, then there you go. And then you potentially got a business. So I like that. I do have this other segment here, and you already sort of like kick things off in the sense of pathways and how you made your way into it. And you just mentioned that your father had a toy business. Is that, or?
He used to work for, he was in the toy industry since I was tiny. So he did Palatoy, and then he worked for Mattel, and then he went out on his own as an agent. So he had lots of different companies that he was selling on behalf of.
Okay, so I can see where that influence certainly came from, where you ultimately ended up. But in terms of this other side of trying to understand children and, seeking truth, facts, explanations for certain types of ways of being, I suppose, and interacting with the world and whatnot, and interacting with services and products, where did that interest come from? Where do you think that originated from?
So I always had an interest in psychology, in sort of how people think and everything. When I was at school, my school at the time, it was a new subject, and they introduced psychology as an option in A level. So I was supposed to take chemistry, and I hated chemistry, so I quickly swapped to take psychology and never really looked back. So I went on and did my degree, and then I did a PhD, and that curiosity about how our brains work and how our behavior impacts others and how we can impact other people's behavior, all of that kind of stuff, I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, at that point, while you're in your studies, you're kind of playing around or toying, pardon the pun, toying with ideas relating to this other world of maybe getting into that and pursuing, research into toys.
So it didn't happen to start with. I think initially I think I was much more focused on education. So I did a teaching qualification alongside my PhD, and I was volunteering in a women's refuge where the children who were escaping domestic violence were just running around with no guidance, no structure, no nothing to do. The focus of the staff at the refuge was always on the women who were obviously in crisis, and the kids were acting up. They obviously had their own issues. And so I went in and volunteered and created a sort of a play-based structure for helping them stay engaged in education and learning through play, because at some point those kids were going to need to go back into school. So we wanted to make sure that they weren't as far behind. We wanted to give them something purposeful to do with their day so that they were able to process what was going on in their lives and cope with the changes. And I think that's where my fundamental belief in the power of play came to being. I then went and taught in Hong Kong for a couple of years. And again, I was teaching kids with additional needs, but I also worked for an organisation and set up an educational program, an after-school educational program in English, because it was just after the handover. So there was a big demand for English lessons because all the schools had gone back to teaching in Cantonese. So there was a big demand for that. And again, those kids have been sat in a Chinese school all day. They weren't going to sit, and it wasn't going to be an educational thing. It had to be playful. It had to be learning through play. So I think those two things possibly steered me back towards child development, play, research. And then I was lecturing for the Open University on child development for a couple of years. And again, my kids were then very little. And it was just lots of different things came together. But it was only when my dad said, oh, could you do a focus group for this brand? And I was like, yeah, okay, how hard can it be?
Yeah.
That's when the career itself really took off. And that was 20-something years ago now.
There you go. See, I really enjoy this segment, Pathways, because it's in your case, it sounds like here's this confluence of all these factors and timing and all these things that kind of amount to, a person such as yourself finding their direction or finding their purpose. And this runs counter to, I think, a lot of thinking with young people in terms of careers. They assume that it's like, well, I need to have everything figured out right now. I need to have the master plan and then just beeline straight for it. And it rarely, rarely ever turns out that way, right? So, yeah.
100%. Yeah, no, I think being able to deal with uncertainty is really valuable for your mental health. But I think almost staying true to your values, and then what is it? You're definite about your goals, you're flexible about your route to the goals.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain degree of awareness as well as you're making your way through life and all these different experiences, and you're paying attention to things that are triggering you in a positive way, or maybe sometimes in not such a positive way. And if you can reflect on those little moments along the way, they can almost act as guideposts in a sense that can kind of direct you to where you might find some degree of satisfaction or purpose.
Yeah, and I think just being open to saying yes to things. If it seems like it's something that you might enjoy or might be helpful or whatever, and you can do it, do it. It's that I think I worry about young people being too risk averse at the moment because they don't know they don't know exactly how it's going to pan out. They don't want to try and see and make it up as they go along. That kind of winging it. I think it's a really important thing in an entrepreneur, and you've got to go, okay, that sounds good. Let's build it as you fly. So I think that approach can be really exciting and empowering, and it can lead to really interesting pathways into things you may never have known about.
Absolutely. And I think as well, like when you are young, you have that time and there is some leeway to go down paths that maybe aren't going to be, something that you ultimately pursue, but at least you are trying them out and you're finding out truly whether or not they could be a good match for you or perhaps not, So I think, this is certainly some sage advice. All right. Well, I would like to step into yet another segment of Q&A discovery here and returning to the present or not so distant past, perhaps. You've built up this reputation within the industry, especially as it pertains to toys and children's development and play and all these different things are being commissioned by the UK government to offer advice on things. I would like to know how you reach that point. Were you making these strategic decisions along the way to build your thought leadership, or were there some fortuitous moments or perhaps a combination of both? Well, what do you think has gone into that element of your career and success?
I would love to say there was a big plan and I know exactly what I was doing. It is pure opportunism. So I think a few things that have happened that have been sort of pivotal moments. There was one really quite early on in my career. I did some work for a brand, and their PR agency did an amazing job of bigging me up. So right from the beginning, I was the country's leading expert on child development and play, and that was never a claim I made. But it sort of became a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when I started, there weren't any psychologists in the toy industry. And so the doctor thing carried a lot of weight. And people seemed to think I knew what I was talking about. And, I tried not to overreach, and I did do my research, and I've got a background in this, and there's various bits that built my credibility. But I think, again, it was sort of snowball effect that everybody's telling me I'm the UK's leading authority on play and child development. So it must be true. It's never something that I've positioned myself at. So that PR agent, I definitely owe a lot to.
Step one, find a good PR agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And because they were working for a brand, it just had more authenticity anyway. Then there was the European Parliament. So I created this balanced play pyramid. And it's a model of, if you think about how kids need a balanced diet of nutrition, then they need a balanced diet of play as well. And different play activities promote different skills and help in different ways. So the idea is that there isn't one really, really good toy and one really, really bad toy. Kids need a mixture of different things in different ways. And so I had this model and I was talking about it, and I got invited to present it at the European Union Parliament at a kind of workshopy session for the toy industry there. And again, that really bolstered my credibility, and people were then sort of, and the model's great, and we've got I'm really proud of the balanced play pyramid and what that brings to our sort of understanding of child development play and different play types and how to help children thrive. So that gave me the confidence to build on that, and I think coming out with a few models. So I've got parent-centered parenting, I've got the balanced play diet, and then we have some frameworks that we've done for different people, like the Toy Association in the States and Mesh Helps. So we've created these frameworks. So we have these models, if you like, that again, I think build the credibility. So doing those just further fuels that kind of, okay, maybe she does know what she's talking about. Let's ask her opinion on this, that, and the other. So I think increasingly I'm getting asked for my opinion on things almost more now than I'm being asked to do the research, because I think they feel like after maybe 20 something years, I've done the research. I kind of know what I'm talking about, and could maybe don't need to do another study to tell people, to be able to help people.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like to me, I mean, certainly the quality has been there across your career. And then also too, this other element of just walking through these open doors, it's kind of returning to something we were speaking about earlier. Maybe some young people aren't doing that, or maybe could do that a little bit more, taking some risks, perhaps, maybe you're not feeling exactly comfortable with this moniker, this label early on in your career as being the toy expert, but okay, so that's what we're going to go with. Okay, we're going to go with this. And then just kind of like growing into that, I suppose. And again, taking some risks along the way, and, certainly falling back on the quality of your work and believing in that, and seeing where things take you. And it sounds like things have certainly worked out in your favor in that sense. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
I have this other question here as well, and this is getting back to the actual, the practicalities of your work. As far as the mission of what you're involved in, it's certainly a noble one, as I'd mentioned earlier on. Presenting information that's going to help parents make good decisions as far as putting, products or toys in front of their children. As far as the work you and your team are involved in regards to the research and analysis and synthesizing all this information, using data, using all the tools that are available to you, what is that like? Certainly there must be some stress and pressure associated with this. Again, this is going in front of children. You want to be putting the right amount of information or the correct information in front of parents to make these critical decisions. What is that like for you and your organization?
So I think it's one of the favorite parts of my job. I think it's where we get to see kids just engaging, and we have a really strict approach to the methodologies we use when we do research with kids, because you can get kids to tell you anything. You give them a new toy and go, who wants to test a new toy? Here's a new toy. They go, okay, it's great, because they want more toys. So doing authentic research with children is something that is a passion of mine. And I see so much bad research out there where kids are, they're invited into a boardroom and sat around a table and asked what they think, and they're just going to tell you what comes into their mind. It's going to have no bearing on how they behave when they're with their friends or at home with their siblings, or how they engage when they're, what TV channel they choose to watch or whatever. So I think it's really important to get the methodology of research right. If you're going to bother to do research with kids, then doing it authentically is really key. But that makes it fun. So we basically run these massive play sessions for kids where they come and they play, and we watch and we get involved, and it's very much a sort of understanding what's underlying what's going on with them. So they might be choosing this toy over that toy, and why is that? Was that because the popular kid has said that that's the cool thing? Is it because it's brightly colored? Is it their favorite character? What is it that's going on? And it's very easy to just take big data, and big data has its place. You need to know how many kids are watching some particular show on YouTube. That's all useful information. But if you don't know why, and you don't know what the so what is, how do you turn that into a commercial strategy? How do you understand whether what you think is going on is actually going on? Because there's the whole correlation versus cause thing that a lot of people confound. So we do a lot of that. We have play cafes and our good play zones where we have kids coming in all the time, just regularly. So they're really comfortable there. They know the place. And if we stick a new toy out and we just leave it amongst the others and we see how they play with it and all of that stuff. So it's great fun. I love it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Absolutely. Would there be anything else that you'd say, like, from the outside looking in, as far as somebody like you or your organization having success, there could be a list of bullet points of like, you have to do this, like you just said, like solid methodology, for example. You really have to have that in place. But beyond that, is there anything else that might not necessarily show up on that bullet point list of critical things that, in your opinion, is of critical importance, is, something that can't be overlooked, but a lot of people might, at times kind of ignore?
I don't know if this is the answer you were looking for, but I think integrity. I think being able to tell truth to power as well. So you've got your clients and they've given you this toy and the kids hate it, and you could massage it. That ability to go, no, this is what we observe. This is how the kids are playing with it.
Yeah.
And being able to do that and sticking to your integrity on the validity of the findings. And I think that and caring about the kids, I think they're the two things that you probably wouldn't see on the job description.
Yeah, I like that. I like that answer. I think that's a really insightful one. I think it's easy to kind of get caught up in like the technical elements of work and whatnot, but then you have these other sides to it all that certainly play into success or the lack thereof for certain individuals. If some of these things aren't managed correctly. I would also assume like curiosity as well, for yourself in terms of, not expecting a certain outcome or how this could go, when you're introducing a new toy and not being.
Yeah. Open-mindedness, definitely, because there have been times where I've got a toy and I'm like, this looks rubbish. And I'll put it in front of the kids and they love it. And vice versa as well. It's happened the other way around. And so I think staying humble, I think, is really important. And there's a reason we test the toys with the kids is because we don't have all the answers because we aren't kids and we're not playing with them. So, whenever I get that wrong, it reminds me of why we do what we do.
I got one last question in this segment here. As far as the work and the fulfillment that you're getting from it, yeah, I wouldn't think it would be all that hard, just in the sense of the nature of what you're involved in. Again, you're working with children, you're delivering happiness on some level, hopefully with some of these products that are hitting the market, that should be expected to succeed and do well. But all the same, I mean, like where do you get a sense of fulfillment in the work that you're involved in?
I really like our team. I mean, I am very proud of our team. I like the kind of the joint mission and the cohesiveness. And I think that gives me a lot of satisfaction. We've just started a new Tuesday Toy Testers Club in the Good Play Zone. And that's the kids that come to that. We're piloting it as a social enterprise venture. So we're not charging anybody to come. We're coming, we're giving them opportunities to play freely. And then we do some reviews of toys as well. And the kids that come to that have just been an absolute joy. And when they turn around and they go, can we come again tomorrow? Can we come again next week? Can we come? I want to come all the time and I don't want to leave and all that sort of stuff. That lets me know we're doing something special for these kids. And I think because I don't know that they would be able to access those kind of experiences if there was admission fees and if it was more formalized. So no, I really like being able to give stuff back.
Yeah. You mentioned that was like a fairly new project that you've just started, but when you first started this whole enterprise or organization, were there some other things as well? Like, I mean, has this feeling of fulfillment, been changing and evolving over time for you, or at its core, is it just what you explained?
I think the other thing that I have got more comfortable feeling good about is the public recognition. So if somebody comes up to me at a trade show and says, "Oh, my wife's a teacher. She really likes what you're talking about, and she follows you, and she's great," and that kind of thing. I used to be really uncomfortable. I think the imposter syndrome hit hard, but actually, I find that really fulfilling because I think if my message is getting out there to people almost that I don't know that are then coming back and giving me feedback, then that feels really nice.
How could it not? Yeah, I like that. All right. Well, we are shifting along into yet another segment here, a water cooler story. In this one here, I'm just asking, guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their work. And I'd love to hear what you have for us today, Amanda.
I think one of my favorite stories, I guess, is around walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So again, within the team, we try and be playful. And I'm a big believer in risky play, and there's a big dilemma, big discussions around how much freedom kids should have to go and take risks. And actually, I believe that they really should. Anyway, we were at a trade show and there was this giant inflatable thing. And one of my team ended up with a black eye because one of the other members of the team was trying to get up onto it and sort of basically elbowed her. And it was the perfect example of, we were all having fun. It just, accidents happen. How do you deal with it? Do you then go, right, we're not doing that again, put all the risks and the barriers up and health and safety, here we go? Or do you go, that's what happens? And fortunately, everybody involved took that's what happens. it's just one of those things that happens when you're playing and you're playing actively and everything. But putting it in a professional, having that kind of professional context, and essentially I'm being the mother hen there and going, oh, somebody's hurt, what do we do? And how do I prevent this? And this should never have happened. To going, actually, it's not the end of the world. And I don't want to sterilize life so much that we take all the risk out of it. What I want to do is minimize the risks or minimize the downsides, but help children manage those risks and keep them in perspective. And I think that kind of flipping of real life, like professional life, into how I feel about play and risky behavior, I think was a real kind of aha moment.
Yeah, I get that. It's an interesting sort of perspective on it all. Certainly being immersed in the world that you're involved in and studying play and how people or children take risks or don't take risks and how they handle failure, how they handle adversity, all these different things. And then seeing it suddenly within your own team. You have this choice in front of you, how you're going to handle this. Yeah, I could see the parallels there and how you might want to really think this through and handle it in a way that's going to be reflective of the ideals and values that you as an organization hold. So yeah, I like that story. It's an insightful one. Well, we are heading into the very last segment here, a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking at the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And, like most industries right now, we're looking at technology from the vantage point of AI and the effects that it's having, certainly. And I can imagine within your world, AI could be this valuable tool as far as, improving your research capabilities, analyzing data, organizing data, all of that wonderful stuff. I could also see it, on the other hand, being this wild variable that maybe, when working with brands or new companies that are looking to put a product or service into the market, there might not be, for example, research data on this particular offering just yet. So it might present some challenges for you and your team in terms of understanding what type of impact this product could have on children. How do you, I guess what I'm getting at here is what is your relationship with technology within your organization? And then how do you handle some of those challenging situations that I was just speaking of?
So within the organization itself, we're very sort of tech. We like to consider ourselves early adopters of tech. We want to stay ahead of the curve. When it comes to supporting children's brands who are incorporating tech into their products for kids, we do a lot of work in helping understand why the tech is going into the product. If it's not enhancing the play value or the educational value or the inclusivity of the product, it shouldn't be in there. It also shouldn't be in there if it detracts from children's imagination, or there are things I think there's a tendency to over-engineer products because it's all singing or dancing, but actually then the kids get bored of it because there's nothing for them to explore or discover. They press this happens, they press that happens. Okay, now what? AI is slightly different, and I think there is a lot more going on there. But the analogy I have is when AR and VR were sort of coming into being sort of 10 years ago, they were being put into toys and they were being shoehorned into toys because it was tech is great and let's make it cool. And for a lot of products, it didn't work because it didn't add value to the product. It just added to the price. So I think when we are looking at tech, it's about celebrating the benefits, maximizing the benefits, mitigating the harms, and designing it and making sure it's age appropriate and responsibly done. But there's a huge opportunity out there for AI to really support neurodivergent learners. There's opportunities for kids who aren't regularly in school, whether that's because they're in hospital, long-term hospital, or chronic illnesses, whether they're in foster care, whether they're refugees, whether they're traveling communities, whatever it is. There's a lot of ways that more personalized learning could really help lots of vulnerable children, but there is also the dangers. And I think we've got to make sure that we don't, I think legislation and everything that's coming through, it feels like a very blunt instrument. So we have to help policymakers and brands and parents understand how to take the good stuff out of the new technology and minimize the harms.
Yeah, and getting to that point of minimizing the harms, for example, I'm just, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm thinking of, years ago when, say, the iPad was hitting the market, and how wonderful that was, because certainly there's a lot of great things that the iPad has been able to do for us, especially when it comes to children and children's programming, games, and all these different things. But then on the flip side, it's highly addictive. Then sometimes you have parents that are just sticking an iPad in front of a child's face for hours on end. And at that time, we didn't have research that was saying like, no, you should not be doing this. Maybe there's some common sense there, but there wasn't actually sound data that was indicating that that was not what we want to be doing. That is going to inflict some harm, developmental harm on these children. With something like AI right now, and like a lot of governments are still grappling with this as well, trying to figure out what is the potential harm here? What are the things that we have to be wary of? In your space, in your world right now, that must be a bit of a challenge, because that data isn't necessarily there.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. It's like the research there's been a lot of call for regulation of social media and stuff and there's, kids under 13 aren't supposed to have social media accounts. Now we know that kids under 13 are accessing social media all the time and it's not good for them. But you can't do the research on it because the legislation says that if you're under 13, you shouldn't be on it. So no, there's no data on who is actually using it if you're under 13 because nobody admits to it, and the data that you get from the tech companies doesn't tell you. So it's a similar thing with AI. You've got to have access to authentic data in order to make sort of the study valid, and that's where I think the way that we conduct our research and talking to parents and observing kids and seeing how they interact, you can use your existing knowledge to go, okay, we might not have any hard data on AI itself, but from what we know about X, Y, and Z, we're fairly confident that this is where we should be heading and this is how we need to behave.
Well, I cannot believe we've blown through this conversation. It feels like we just got started here, Dr. Gummer. It has been a true pleasure. And I really do believe that listeners are going to love to hear this. I think it just, like we started this conversation, it presents a different world, to research psychology altogether, the melding of, the commercial side of the business as well as, the research side. So yeah, I can't thank you enough for all of your time and insights today. It's been a true pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, for those interested in learning more about Dr. Gummer and her work, you can do so via her websites, fundamentally.children.com, as well as goodplayguide.com. As for socials, you can find her and her organizations on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And as always, I will have links for all of these on the website, lifeasa.com. And hey, if you like today's show, please be sure to tell a friend and share to show further support. You can always rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. As I mentioned off the top, head on over to YouTube. I do have that channel over there, which hosts highlights from these audio recordings. And I would love, love, love that like or subscribe. Now, finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life As A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.